trip. So here is a picture from our trip to Washington, D.C., where we were doing advocacy work on Capitol Hill. You'll see Abdelhalim, myself, Katie Kelshaw, our senior organizer from Idaho, and Teresa, our senior organizer for Washington State. It was really great to be there. And I want to make sure that Abdelhalim has a chance to share a little bit as well. Abdelhalim is our senior fellow for advocacy and communications from Michigan. So Abdul Halim, you want to say hello?
Absolutely. Thank you, Teresa and Isaac. Deeply appreciate working with you guys. You guys are fantastic. I think as a Palestinian American, I think going to Congress and kind of interacting with people on the Hill and really being able to speak with lawmakers and their staffs about kind of the changing tides in public opinion about U.S. course of action in the Middle East and our place in the world. And for me personally speaking, the U.S. role in arming a genocide in Gaza, the ongoing ethnic cleansing campaign in the south of Lebanon, all these things are very deeply personal to me. And you are starting to see how the tides changing has kind of impacted lawmakers' receptiveness to these issues, where these issues were otherwise not very tolerable to speak about. But it's also kind of invigorated me to know that I've made the right path in life to advocate for the right things, to center human rights and accountability, law and justice at the center of my work. And it truly is an honor to work with all of you, everybody here at Action Corps, to have Josh here to induce the change that we want to see in the world.
Thanks, Abdul Halim. I just shared in the chat a link to our agenda for this evening, along with a few relevant links. And oftentimes we go to events with speakers, and then everybody goes home learning about how horrible things are, and we go on about our days. But at Action Corps, we like to keep the action in Action Corps, and we like to lead with action. We don't have to know everything in order to take some action. So we take some action first, and then we'll learn more about what we're taking action on. Um, and this way, for those of you who are just here for the action, you can take the action and then go about your evening. We hope that you'll all will stay on afterwards. So Abdul Halim has put together a really great sheet that I will share the link to in the chat. And we are going to actually take a moment to call our members of Congress. Um, and oh yeah, it's right up on the screen. Um, and the link is also in the chat. So you may have heard that the Israeli military has been bombing, occupying, displacing people in southern Lebanon. In fact, more than 1.2 million people from southern Lebanon, which represents about a fifth of the country's population, have been forcibly displaced by Israeli forces. The white phosphorus, which has been banned, it's been illegally deployed over the homes of people in southern Lebanon. There have been, and there's an ongoing occupation. And this, just today, there was airstrikes, bombings that happened, um, and there's been no debate in Congress about this. There has been a resolution introduced by Representative Rashida Tlaib. It has about half a dozen co-sponsors, and Abdul Halim and I have been in touch with Rashida's staff. We met with Rashida a few months ago as well, and we are looking to build support for that resolution. So, what we want to invite you to do this evening is to actually pick up your phone and we'll all make this call together. We'll call Congress and we'll ask for our U.S. representative. If you don't know their name, you can find them via this link, which I will put directly in the chat as well. Um, and then you'll ask for your member of Congress. You'll get connected to their office. They won't be in because it's after hours, and hopefully you'll be able to leave them a message. If it doesn't let you leave a message, and you can call back tomorrow morning. But this is a congressional switchboard, so let's leave this up. Does anybody have any questions before we jump in to do this? We're gonna call them and we're gonna say, "I'm a constituent. I'm calling to urge the representative to support the War Powers Resolution." Oh, where'd it go? Can you bring back the screen share, Abdel? Um, and we're calling to urge the representative to support the War Powers Resolution to block unauthorized U.S. military involvement in Lebanon with H. Con Res 83. That's the bill number. Um, and just so you all know, the United States is providing intelligence sharing with the Israeli Defense Forces, providing logistical support, other military support. We don't know the full extent to that military support, but even today in the airstrikes that happened, it was confirmed that the US was involved. And I saw a report from Massachusetts Peace Action just now that 8 people in Lebanon were killed from that airstrike, and the U.S. is complicit. So we're calling on Congress to stand up to the administration and say U.S. participation has to stop. And then you can add on this additional information if you like. What's important to say also is I can my you say your name um, since and I'm a constituent from and say your town or city. Um, and you can say at the end, my number is um, if you would like to call back. Any questions? All right, we're gonna just take about 3 minutes to go ahead and make these calls. Once you finish making your call, I encourage you to put in the chat that you called, you left a message, something like that, so we know that you've done that, and it will be great to see all those messages coming in through the chat. I encourage you to mute your line if it's not muted. We'll leave this call script on the screen. Abdel, is it possible to make it a little bit larger, just to expand out? Um, and yeah, and you can also mute your computer if you turn down the volume on your computer if you don't want to hear me talking. Or I'll be available to answer questions if
How
people
is this, Isaac?
use it.
Is this
This is
working?
this works. Yeah, that's. Does anybody need it? Oh yeah, it's even better. But let's leave up that phone number at the top. That's great. And thanks, Steve, for already having made a phone call today for this. Excellent. All right, go ahead. We'll come back in just a couple minutes as soon as you finish your calls. And if you have questions, I'm here to answer. So I'm going to pass the mic to Abdelhalim Abdelrahman, who is our senior fellow for Action Corps for Advocacy and Communications. He's an independent Palestinian American writer and political analyst who's covered Palestinian affairs, U.S. politics, the broader Middle East. His work has been featured in The Hill, MSN, The New Arab, La Razón, and Responsible Statecraft. Abdul Halim, so glad that you're here with us to help moderate.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I would just like to quickly ask that we all just kind of keep our mics muted just so we all can hear each other efficiently. Um, but thank you very much, Isaac, for that introduction. Thank you, everybody, for taking action on that call. Uh, Deeply needed during this time, also deeply appreciative. Yes, I am the Senior Advocacy and Communications Fellow at Action Corps. I focus on U.S. Palestine affairs with a specific focus on U.S. Armed Exports Control Law, LAE, Foreign Assistance Act, Congressional War Powers. But this call is not necessarily about me, but more of what we do as a collective organization. Action Corps is very much predicated on being a people's organization, empowering and advocating grassroots advocates. So thank you all for joining today. Without further ado, I actually wanted to introduce our speaker for today. To be quite personal here, Josh, I think you were kind of the first one to be very brave and set this kind of wide range of consciousness on Palestinian human rights in motion. You resigned from the State Department, I believe, a couple of months right after the October 7th attacks and the Biden administration's choice to fully support Israel's genocide in Gaza. Um, Josh resigned from the State Department and co-founded a new policy with Tarek Habash, who was the Department of Education under the Biden administration. Um, Josh, thank you so much for the work that you do, the principles and values that you share, and working to create an equitable and just Middle East with laws rooted in accountability and human rights. Josh, just want to give you the floor, opportunity to introduce yourself further, what a new policy is doing. The floor is yours, man. Thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, thanks, Abdelhalim, Isaac, and everyone. Really appreciate the opportunity to be with you this evening, and good to see some very familiar names as well in the attendance list here. So good evening to you all. So I'd like to make this as much of a conversation as we can. I thought what I might do, well, maybe just a bit more background about myself and my organization, but then I'd like to sort of talk big picture and then, sort of translate that into what we're seeing these days in Congress. So, as Abdulhalim said, I resigned from the State Department where I was working. I was actually part of the bureau at the State Department that's responsible for security assistance and arms transfers around the world. And I resigned because it was very clear that the Biden administration policy, now continued under the Trump administration, towards Gaza was one that violated every moral premise, every legal restriction, ran against America's interest, and yet there was no interest at all within the administration in even pausing for a moment to discuss whether it was the right course. I thought that it was an important conversation to be had. If it couldn't be had inside of government, it had to be had by the American people. And to bring it to them, I had to resign. And shortly after I resigned, I was contacted by my now co-founder of our organization, A New Policy, Tarek Habash, who's a Palestinian American from Ohio. He was a political appointee at the time in the Department of Education, and he resigned shortly after I did. And as we were talking, we realized that though we were coming from two different perspectives, two different parts of governments, two different upbringings, we had a very similar theory of the problem, which is that at the end of the day, what we are talking about when we look at American complicity in Gaza is not a policy problem fundamentally, it's actually a political problem. There are plenty of people in government, including our elected representatives, who behind closed doors will say, what we are doing is wrong. It makes no sense, it is harmful, it is destructive, but I can't say that publicly. So what we are trying to do through our work in A New Policy is essentially to get at that political problem, to restructure the political and economic incentives for politicians and across our society so that it becomes very clear that it is actually support for genocide, support for harm to civilians that is the political loser, and it is standing up for human rights and for accountability that is the winning political practice. I'll stop the pitch there and just to say, do visit us. You can find us online at anewpolicy.org, and I think Isaac may have a link there in the agenda for today. So um, I want to back up and think big because I think that Palestine and this issue of what is happening there and across the broader Middle East uh, is a very important indicator of what is happening in our world. So where is the world today? I mean, I think as I see it, and I say this having worked in State Department for over a dozen years, uh, is that the US role in the world, right? We at the end of the Cold War, we were the hegemon, the superpower, and the problem is that essentially that's all we want to remain. Uh, I think that the US is rudderless when it comes to its vision for the world, aimless, and really has no objective other than maintaining the status quo, of maintaining sort of US global dominance. And to be clear, there are certainly other actors around the world uh, who would love to be globally dominant and who probably would make an even worse job of it. So let's be clear about that. At the same time, the problem that you have is that while a lot of political theorists will say, well, if you have a superpower, that's a stabilizing force. I think the opposite is actually true. That over time, you actually get into what some political scientists call hegemonic destabilization. That in order to maintain our leadership, we end up sort of digging some holes deeper and deeper, creating more and more rivalries and backing allies and partners simply because they are the allies and partners we have always backed, regardless of how they are pursuing their own interests and what impact that has. And that's what we see right now in the US-Israel relationship in the Middle East. You see an Israel that is, first of all, I think, at a very deep level, insecure in itself. And this is, I think, something that emerges out of the very painful, horrific history of the Jewish people, but is also now become embedded in the Israeli psyche. And when you combine that with the regional hegemonic power that Israel has, you see a country that is convinced that it must stay on top and that it can only do so through two ways, either through co-opting friendly regimes, regardless of the democratic, or the anti-democratic sort of impact that that has. So if you look at a country like the United Arab Emirates, where Israel is has a very close relationship with the government, but there isn't much of democracy. And in most Arab countries, if there was much of a democracy, the relationships the countries have with Israel would be very different. So I think it either wants to see the region in that status or in a status of state failure, in a context where there can be no threat. And that's where we see, for example, Lebanon right now, Syria, where you have had a really welcome change of regime, the deposition of Bashar al-Assad and his replacement with a government that seems to be taking, as far as we can tell, some significant steps towards both reconstruction and also pluralism. And yet Israel has been the major obstacle to the success of that regime. Or indeed now in Iran, where we see, I think, an Israeli design on the country of Iran that aims for state collapse, for regime collapse, and that's where one of many areas, I think, where Israeli interest in the region and American interests diverge significantly. What this is all part of, however, is a world in which might makes right. And at the end of the day, that's bad for all of us. It's the end of the dream of a rules-based order. And eventually that filters back into our system because just as the same way that we see the US trying to impose its status quo as the hegemon around the world, we see the same things happening domestically, where there is an effort, I think, that we now see to maintain a racial status quo, an ethnic status quo, a religious status quo. And all of this ultimately is destabilizing and destructive, and particularly destructive of accountability because the hegemon, the powerful, cannot be held accountable and will not be held accountable, and ultimately of the rules themselves, therefore, and also of democracy. So where do things now stand in our own system, particularly on this question of US policy on Palestine? I think it's very clear that there has been, first of all, a transformation in how the American people think about this issue. We see certainly a supermajority in the Democratic Party of the electorate who want to see an end to US military support for Israel. There's actually a poll that just came out today from Pew that shows even amongst Republicans under 50, 57% have a negative view of Israel. So this is a radical transformation of public opinion. The problem is that public opinion doesn't always result in political change. And if it is going to, it certainly doesn't happen overnight, right? American politics moves in increments of 2 years and 4 years. Um, and where we are right now, particularly with this administration, is a White House and a president that are essentially locked into their support for what is now the Netanyahu government in Israel and for the status quo. Um, but that lock-in is temporary and it's unusual, right? I think really the idea of American unconditional support for Israel reached its highest level, frankly, under President Joe Biden. Trump is at least a bit more transactional. But this hasn't always been the case. There have been, American presidents have been willing to apply some form of pressure, and if you go back to Eisenhower, significant amount of pressure on Israel. And I think that we will eventually regain that. But so right now the policies are locked in, but that's a temporary status. And the 2028 election cycle is what I want you to keep your eyes on in particular, because that's where the schisms will become clear, both within the Democratic Party, and I think in the Democratic presidential primaries, we will see these questions of support for Israel and support for the Palestinians become one of those wedge issues. I think it's very possible we could also see those schisms revealing themselves in the Republican primaries. If you have, for example, a Marco Rubio or Ted Cruz on the one hand, running against the JD Vance on the other. So our purpose has to be to prepare the field, to set the field and shift the narrative so that the starting point in that cycle is not where it was 2 years ago. If you think back to 2024 in that presidential cycle, where Kamala Harris didn't dare separate herself at all from President Biden's positions. Uh, our job now, so let's be clear, you all just took part in an action alert to call your members of Congress and ask them to join this War Powers resolution on Lebanon. Um, the odds of it coming to the floor are low. The odds of it passing are lower. The odds of it making any difference, even if it did pass to President Trump, are pretty much nil. But that doesn't mean that what you just did is not important. Because how do we set the field? How do we build for the future? And the answer is we have to raise attention, make it clear that we care about these issues. We, the people, we, the voters, care about these issues. Get members on the record so that we can then turn around to them in the future, particularly, should the politics flip, should the House or the Senate switch party leadership and say, look, you were on this legislation then, you need to be on it again now. And also, of course, because we are in a critical midterm year, get candidates to speak up as well, to reject funding from Israel First lobbies like AIPAC, but also to make clear where they stand on these issues. Because this is an incredible opportunity in this midterm year to shift our elected incumbents, because they are paying attention to us, to shift candidates and to get good candidates into place. So that's all to say, thank you very much for the work that you are doing. I'm really honored to be a part of it. I think we are all a part of a broader ecosystem that recognizes, first of all, the very dark situation we're in, but that change is possible. It comes with time, it comes with effort. But what we are building here and what you are doing here is what shapes the future of American politics and ultimately American policy. And thank you very much for doing it. And let's have a conversation.
Absolutely. Josh, thank you so much for that very, very, very clear-eye analysis on kind of where we stand right now and what the future is, and of course, the change that we seek. We also do want to make this a very interactive and immersive experience. Josh, people have questions for you. So, we are going to field some questions from the audience. Please do raise your hand and I will call on you in the order I receive them. And if I'm not able to see it, just please drop it in the chat box and I will address it as sees fit. So feel free to raise your hand if you guys are ready to start, and I will call your name. So no questions right now from the audience, or
We have one from Maryland.
Oh, okay, we do. Yes, yes, yes. Also, to be clear, there is a raise your hand function on Zoom, but thank you for pointing that out. Marilyn, please go ahead and ask your question. My apologies.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I mean, you were very much an inspiration, Mr. Paul, when you resigned, and it was you and Aaron Bushnell, were both really stood up, and unfortunately, we lost Aaron, but I'm so glad that you're still active and pushing for an end to these atrocities. Um, I just noticed that you left something out of the equation that I thought you might bring in, and I'm interested as someone who's in the State Department, what you think about it. You talked about Eisenhower, and Eisenhower did point out the dangers of the military-industrial complex, and that is, I know a lot. I know a magazine. I think it might have been The Nation. I don't remember what it was, but some years back oh no, it was NPR had an interview with the head of Lockheed Martin, and he said they deliberately have their contracts and production in every state so that the Congress people, if they vote against a war appropriation, will allegedly be losing votes from all the workers who are involved. Moreover, what the other producers do, and I'm sure you've studied this, they have the other things like the HIMARS and these other huge, horrible things they've invented to kill people. They're not just made in one place. The stuff comes from all kinds of states that you wouldn't think of as being the center for so that they have population centers, especially in times like this where jobs are so hard. People there's hardly any hope in some cases, that they have to hang on to they can't be opposed to their own destiny by opposing the war industry. So I wondered how you thought that played into your equation.
Yeah, thanks so much for that point and those questions, and you're absolutely right. So yes, I mean, defense companies are very canny about spreading their production around the country, really to protect, as you say, their own bottom line, so that it's very hard for Congress to cancel a weapons procurement program or that sort of thing. I think the bigger problem here, though, is there's that saying I'm sure you're all familiar with, if all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And I think it's much, much easier these days for the United States in particular to turn to tools of military force than it is to engage in diplomacy with the difficult fact that diplomacy involves compromise and giving up things and listening, right? Or development work around the world, where it takes years and years and years to help countries build functional governments. It's much easier to just sort of, fight those counterterrorism battles, whatever you want to call them, or use that military tool. And I think that's really where the problem is, that we have so overinvested in our military tools and so underinvested in development and diplomacy, um, which again, take longer, are harder, but ultimately are the only real routes to sustainable, just, lasting peace and stability. Um, so at the end of the day, I actually am not one of the people who thinks that the military industrial complex actually sets our policy. In my experience, they would certainly reach out to the State Department when there was an arms sale to a foreign country that they needed some help with. But they were not there sort of pushing us to go to war or providing policy advice or anything like that. I think the problem is much in a way, much deeper than that. It's that we have become so reliant on their products, and it is so easy for us to spend. As you know, the administration is now requesting $1.5 trillion in defense spending in the next year budget. That everything else, doesn't even bear a second thought. If you have a problem, just send a B-2 bomber. That's not a good way to conduct foreign policy. It's not sustainable. It's not ultimately safe for us either. But it's great for defense industry bottom lines.
Thank you for that wonderful question, Marilyn and Josh, for that very sophisticated answer. Does anybody else have any questions
There's a question in the chat from someone who's S.A. Linden, which I can read and then answer if that's. So the question is, can you discuss some of the situation where several parties in Israel are coming together to oppose Netanyahu? First, to be clear, I'm not an Israel policy analyst. I'm certainly familiar with the politics, but that's not my specialty. But so first of all, Netanyahu, if you're a 30-year-old Israeli, Netanyahu with a couple of years here and there is pretty much all you've known. And he is, certainly an incredible politician, right? But he is not necessarily universally popular. As you know, he's facing corruption charges. There's a number of, he's, tried to conduct, in 2022, 2023, he had this judicial reform program that would have, taken away or limited, the democracy that exists in Israel for Jewish citizens of Israel. And so now you have a number of opposition parties, the two main leaders of which have come together to try and put together a joint slate to oppose Netanyahu. I believe that the leader of one of those, Naftali Bennett, who, by the way, has been very clear that he will never countenance a Palestinian state. He has said that they're not children, they're terrorists. I mean, don't confuse a change in government with a change in policy when it comes to Palestinians. But he has also been clear that he would not countenance having any of the Arab Israeli parties in his coalition. So I think what this all boils down to is that the challenges that we face and the problems that if you look at Israel's approach in recent years, they go much deeper than any one person. I think Netanyahu is certainly very effective and probably more effective than his competition in manipulating American politicians. But at the end of the day, whatever the outcome of the elections that are expected in Israel in October, I wouldn't expect. I would expect a change in tone, possibly, if Netanyahu loses, and that's a big if. But I would not expect a significant change in substance.
Yeah.
I have a question or at least a comment. Can you?
I'm sorry, I think Steve had his hand up first on here.
I'm trying to, let me find that. Yeah, fine. Thank you.
Steve, you could go.
Thanks. I was struck, Josh, by your saying when you were defining the source of Israel's problem, you defined it almost in psychological terms. Mm-hmm. That this is a country which has actually weaponized its historical trauma. Turning a history of fear into a way of life. And on the other hand, you described what we have to do in purely political terms. But it seems to me, I keep wondering whether there's a disconnect there, whether if I don't think it's just Israel. I think it's also in the United States that Trump himself personally is clearly a traumatized person. If you read about his father or Elon Musk's father, these are people who have psychological problems and have turned them into political action. And so I wonder whether that is not something that one should take into account rather than simply saying, in the long run, the truth is on our side. Isn't there a question about how does one deal with power brokers, with things that are going on in the world that are based in societal trauma? Thanks.
Yeah, so I think that is an excellent question. I think really the best person to answer it I'm trying to remember his name. He's a Holocaust survivor, psychologist, uh, and professor in New York. It'll come to me. Um, yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, societies are people, right? And societies, I think, can take on a certain psychology. Certainly, there's an American psychology. I think we're all familiar with what that looks like, both at its best and at its worst. Um, so, I don't think that I'm necessarily equipped to address that, but I think you raise a very important question. I'm going to drop a link in the chat here to a paper I did last year that sort of dives a bit deeper into this question of um, this the psychology of insecurity that I think is part of the dynamic when it comes to Israel and insatiable insecurity, I would say. Yes, Gabor Mate, someone put in the chat. Exactly. Um, Incredible human being who is a psychologist by training and has done a lot of work on this. So I would definitely encourage you to look up his work. But I think you raise a really important point.
Doris is next, I believe.
Thank you. I finally found the feature. I couldn't find it at first. Um, I have recently, I guess I'm mainly wanting to ask Josh how effective you think that boycott, divestment, and sanctions work is. And I think that it's really important for citizens in the U.S. to feel that they can have a something to say about how weapons are sent to Israel. And I know that the state of Washington is the only state, it's just recently happened, where they are doing a boycott of Caterpillar.
Mhm.
Caterpillar, of course, provided they bulldoze homes with those machines. And I know Rachel Corrie, who was killed approximately 2 decades ago, was killed by one. And so finally, the state of Washington, and they are the only state in the United States, is refusing to do business with that company. And I'm wondering if you know of any other such things. It's taken a long time, but it's got to start somewhere. And people in the United States, if we're going to be paying our taxes to support this war, we need to at least be doing something very tangible about keeping those weapons out of their hands.
Yeah, no, exactly. So first of all, on the boycott and divestment side of the equation, there are efforts ongoing in a number of states and a number of localities to divest from things like Israel bonds and also defense industry stocks, all that sort of thing. I think CalPERS, which is the California Personnel Retirement Fund, the biggest in the country, has divested from, for example, military stocks. The state of North Carolina, interestingly, just recently divested from a whole range of investments based on, ethical standards, including those relating to Israel. There are a number of efforts like that. However, there are also, I think it's 37 states around the country where you cannot contract with the state if you are boycotting Israel, right? Not if you're boycotting America or some other US state. If you're boycotting Israel, you cannot contract with the state governments, including in Texas, in Maryland, in 37 states. It's crazy. And there's actually a bill in Congress right now that would expand the punishments for boycotting and make it a felony subject to 20 years in prison for US citizens for joining international boycotts of Israel. Um, so, so I think the answer is, look, those 37 states wouldn't have those laws. This wouldn't be an effort now in Congress if boycotts and divestments were not effective. And we know they're effective because we know history. We've seen, for example, South Africa, where the United States was very late to the game of sanctioning the apartheid regime in South Africa. But it was very much the global boycott, the global unwillingness, including in the sports arena, in the entertainment arena, but across the board, that actually put the pressure on South Africa that ultimately led to change. So yes, these are effective tactics. Yes, they are something that we can all do. To borrow that environmentalist phrase, think global, act local. It's something very much that we can do. And I think it is very much worth pushing. And certainly, the other side thinks that it's worth paying attention to as well.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that answer, Josh. And really good question, Doris. A lot of fish on BDS. Because we are running a little bit low on time, I do want to just address one more question from the chat. I know a lot of people have questions. I deeply apologize. But Stephen Gary had a question, and I want to make sure you saw it, Josh, because I feel like this is also really up your avenue here. Stephen asked that his congressman, Adam Smith, is stuck in the idea that large weapons provide deterrence for Israel for being attacked by other Middle East countries. His question is, how do we convince them to change this perspective?
Yeah, great question. In talking to members of Congress about, objecting to arms transfers, this is one of the issues that always comes up. Well, Israel lives in a tough neighborhood. They need to be able to defend themselves. Um, you know, and I had this argument repeatedly while I was in the State Department and then after I left it with the Biden administration, who continue to supply arms to Israel in the context of, the genocide in Gaza, and tried to make the argument, look, even if you cut off weapons today, it's not like Israel isn't going to have weapons tomorrow. They have stockpiles. What you will do is force them to actually make tough choices from their perspective of, do they want to hold on to those stockpiles to deal with an external threat like Iran, or are they just going to keep, dropping, 2,000-pound bombs all over the place on Gaza? The Biden administration never forced that issue. Now, I think that fundamentally, however, things have changed significantly since that discussion, right? We've now gone through this, two conflicts now with Iran. The region has changed significantly. The threat from Iran is much, much lower than it ever was. There are still members of Congress who make this discrimination. So if you remember, last month in the Senate, there was a vote on two resolutions put forward by Senator Bernie Sanders to block arms to Israel. One of them was on 1,000-pound bombs. One of them was on armored bulldozers. You had 37 Democrats vote to block 1,000-pound bombs. You had 40 vote to block armored bulldozers. Why did 3 vote for the bulldozers, not for the bombs? It was precisely because of this Iran question. That, 1,000-pound bombs they might need in that context, but bulldozers obviously not relevant to Iran. I actually, I think that's nonsense, but I actually think it's a thread worth pulling on. There's a bill in Congress in the House right now, actually. There's a couple of bills. One you're probably familiar with is called Block the Bombs, which would block 6 or 7 different types of munitions from going to Israel. There's another one that was introduced more recently. It's a bit more controversial, but it's called the Ceasefire Compliance Act, that says specifically Israel cannot use US weapons in the West Bank and Gaza unless it meets a whole series of conditions that it's never going to meet. That is the sort of thing I think that for someone like Adam Smith, we should be pushing him on. Okay, got it. He's not going to sign off on block the bombs. But here is a bill that specifically says this doesn't think about, Israel's conflict with Iran. This just says you cannot use US weapons in the West Bank and Gaza. So what is your argument now, Congressman Smith? This addresses exactly the problem you said it does. So, again, I think with any member of Congress, we're not going to get them from 0 to 100 overnight. We have to find the pathway for them. And I think he's indicating what the pathway for him is, right? He's indicating that the pathway here is not Israel's sort of external regional defense. It's, the Palestinians and the West Bank and Gaza. So let's walk him up that pathway and not let him use it as an excuse.
Thank you for that. Really, really appreciate that question. Actually, so I will leave. Actually, we are running a bit pressed for time. We have about 5 minutes left. Firstly, I want to thank everybody for their participation, their great questions, your thoughtfulness, and Josh, of course, your deeply attentive answers. I was taking notes as you were speaking, really, really a lot that our activists can definitely use in our conversations with our lawmakers as well. I want to just turn it over to Isaac, who will kind of, help us wrap up the conversation. But everybody, deeply thank you so much. And if I did not get to your question, anybody, I deeply apologize. Certainly not personal or intentional whatsoever.
Thanks so much, Abdul Halim, and thank you, Josh. Really appreciate your participation with us. Thanks everyone who's joined tonight. I just put a link in the chat for if you didn't get an email about this event this evening and you would like to join our list. We'd love to keep in touch with you. Um, we also have volunteer opportunities, and if you'd like to join as a member, we welcome your participation in Action Corps. I wanted to share also with you a link. We are attempting to collect testimonials about Action Corps, about our organizing, to be able to share with folks. And if you're up for taking 2 minutes and clicking on the link I just shared in the chat, we would be grateful. 1 or 2 sentences about your interaction with our organization would be very, very valuable to us. In closing, I also wanted just to open an opportunity for anybody who would like to share one thing that you're taking away from this evening, whether it's an action that you are compelled to take or something that Josh shared that resonated for you, um, or just it's nice to hear a couple of things, takeaways before we say goodnight. And if you'd like to put it in the chat instead, we welcome you to put any feedback there. If you have suggestions for how we can make these calls work better, we would be interested. We plan to continue hosting monthly calls, action calls. You can put that in the chat or send us an email. And I see in the chat, thank you for the good work and sharing. Um, Lots of what an heroic and uncommon action, resigning from the State Department because of its immoral policies. Yes, your story has been inspiring to many of us, Josh. Thank you. And appreciation for the connection to Gabor Mate. The comment on lawmakers not speaking up is political and not policy. Thank you for that, Josh. I remember hearing this phrase from our friends from Stop the War UK. They talk about bomb first, talk later. And when you were talking about the hammer and the nail analogy, I was remembering that phrase. Um, I want to thank everybody for having called their members of Congress this evening, taking action. As Josh said, it helps move us forward. And one of the things about war powers resolutions are that they are the one tool in the House of Representatives that is privileged when it comes to war. It's the one thing that they can do to compel a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives and make members take a stand. And that's what we've been seeing, a whole bunch of Iran war powers resolution votes that Democrats have been introducing. And we look forward to seeing more war powers resolutions introduced and voted upon to make members take a stand. And we will continue organizing for as long as we are able and as long as it's needed. It's people power that makes this happen. The power of money and the power of institutional power is great, but the power of people we have seen be even greater. When we come together strategically and build coalitions, we can make change that are needed. Um, and great to see the continued message in the chat about realistic and useful presentation from Andy. Thank you. All right. Well, have a good night, everyone. We'll keep the line open for a couple more minutes if folks want to stay on and chat. But thank you for everyone for joining. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.